Well, dear audience, we are what we do. In Tjepka's presented prevention program, as well as in most programs that train coping with aggression, which are springing up like mushrooms, an important aspect should be considered. Talking about predetermined picture stories and practice role plays sounds quite good. But this does not guarantee that one's decision will concur with future actions. In other words, a real problem exists between arriving at a conclusion and acting according to these principles. I'm going to prove my thesis as follows. First, I enlarge on the comprehension of social action, showing how historical, sociological, and psychological changes have an effect on our behavior and how it interferes with the nuclear family. Then I describe necessary terms for a successful social-emotional learning by means of a concrete example. In the science-based discussion, we differentiate between primary, secondary, and tertiary prevention. Professor Tjepka's curriculum Faustlos is a concept of a secondary prevention that contains all preventive support measures for situations which are empirically straining and could emerge as crises. Tjepka's program for couples becoming parents aims for a primary prevention, which is understood as a prevention of problematic interactions already from the get-go. In this case, before childbirth. Although primary prevention should be expected of everybody, not only of experts, there are a lot of parents who are not up to the task of bringing up their children. Why is that so? To approach this question, it is necessary to know more about social action. From an analytical viewpoint, one can observe three different transformations. First of all, the cultural normative change. Due to the industrialization at the beginning of the 19th century, there was a drastic alteration of gender and labor roles. Nearly at the same time as the middle-class family arose, some tensions and crises occurred in the 20th century, which culminated in the educational reform of George Picht, in the feminist and student movement in 1968, and the increasing gainful occupation of women, not only for economic reasons, but also to bring in their skills. The desire for free development of the individual has expanded. Klagig stated this trend as a transfer from obligating and accepting norms to values of self-fulfillment. Secondly, the social structural change, which was also caused by the industrialization, has led to the detachment of strong traditional bonds, such as social class, religion, and tradition. People have to base their decisions on the marketplace, political and commercial general living conditions, like, for example, the insufficient part-time offerings to hardly considered private relationship. And it's almost not possible to realize an egalitarian partnership because of the society's structural demands. In this context, I would like to cite Andreas Flittner. Die Familie ist Austragungsort der in der Entwicklung der modernen Gesellschaft angelegten Konflikte zwischen den Geschlechtern. Gesellschaftliche Probleme erscheinen als private und werden, eben weil sie privat gelöst werden müssen, auch als solche behandelt. Thirdly, the individual personal change plays an important role. As a result of the incremental subsidiary systems, people don't experience themselves as an integrated whole. Social appreciation is honored by instrumental and strategic criteria, which indeed communicate success and individual satisfaction. However, they don't make a contribution to the search of a separate identity. It is getting difficult to achieve this basic human need. All these historical, sociological, and psychological backgrounds have direct effects on the family. Owing to the stepwise cultural changes of the feminine role model, childbearing is not the only aim in life of a woman. Self-realization is getting rather more important, which is more difficult to fulfill because, as the statement of the individual personal change has showed, self-realization is not easy to obtain. Parents don't want to accept changes after childbirth, and they don't take enough time for the baby to get involved with their child and with its needs. Illustrations about the social structural change demonstrate how families are dependent on the financial standing. They can only scratch out a living if they meet the demands like flexibility and mobility. In addition, unfavorable general conditions like scarcely available daycare and unfriendly family policies have negative effects for a successful compatibility of family and profession. All these items have a negative impact on the partnership and the relationship between parent and child. Principle for education, like Mr. Tierpka said as well, time, rules and discipline, warmth, fairness and sensitivity are not provided, with fatal long-term consequences. Necessary skills like self-confidence, communication, and emotional competences cannot be acquired. Lacking self-confidence has to be strengthened at the expense of others by perpetrating violence. How can we break this vicious circle? Tierpka's approach, comprising social-emotional learning, respectively the advancement of empathy, anger management, and impulse control, seems indeed very sensible. At the same time, it must be considered that values like solicitousness, truthfulness, and fairness can only be imparted to pupils if they grapple reconstructively with it. The discourse in a community is not successful until it deals with real dilemmas and predominant conflicts. An important precondition for a future application of the discussed ways of behavior, like in his curricula, is an emotional bond to a real problem. A concrete example ought to reflect this. In a primary school in Hinterforst, where I live, there is a football field for kids. During break, the 6th graders are always playing football. Even though the younger ones sometimes want to participate, the older don't let them play. This has frequently led to conflicts up to excesses with fisticuffs. Only once all affected boys and girls gather at a round table, search together for solutions, and teachers asked for implementing the decision made there the very next day, discussions became worthwhile. Using the playground becomes a shared norm, and at the same time, following elementary skills can be practiced. the oldest kids have to put themselves in the shoes of the youngest, who couldn't participate. That would be empathy. Some schoolboys have to assume responsibility for compliance of the agreement. That would be responsible acting. And during the process, children learn to listen, argue, and discuss. Furthermore, their self-efficacy will be increased because they feel that they are part of the problem and that they can influence the decision. Fundamental for a promising discourse is also that the teacher presupposes that they are negotiating with adults. Of course, it goes in the same direction as Micha said about respect. To sum up, I would like to emphasize that this aspect of the decision-action problem should be more fully taken into consideration. Instead of working with specified curricula and discuss hypothetical stories, teachers should in fact tackle real problems in class and not look the other way. Arriving at a conclusion won't be enough to change something, because in the end, we are what we do and not what we reflect. Thanks for your attention.
Very much for your presentation. You want to recommend?
I really would like to make some comments on that. Thank you so much. It's really very inspiring, and I agree with many of your additional ideas. So it's just a clarification what I'm going to do now. I think that you are very well advised that one should differentiate between the real situational conflicts and the curriculum-triggered conflicts, which are just a model for the pupils. So how can we go along with these problems? We do that by at least two solutions. We see the whole school as a real situation paradigm, and usually the pupils write down rules and disciplines for the school, and if there is a conflict, and especially a violent behavior conflict outside in the schoolyard, the teachers refer to the Vossloos curriculum to bridge the gap between the exercises and the real world. And although the children are asked to bring those conflicts which happened in the street with other kids to the school to talk about them. So the teachers try somehow to transfer the paradigm situation to the real world situation. The second proceeding is that you not only have one exercise, that you're going through these exercises years for years. And that's the same as in the parenting. I mean, you have so many conflicts as a child with your parents or with your sisters, and you have to cope with these conflicts. And you do it in a way how your family is managing it. And now in the school, maybe you find other ways as a child to cope with these problems. Then you have two models in your mind. One is that of your family, and the other is that which you learned in the school. And the children has to decide the alternatives. Huh? So there also is a very fine solution that we have, like at home with the parents, we have years of training to find the second model for the children. And especially for these children at risk. Huh? Vossloos is, and that I would see it in another perspective. Faustlos is a primary prevention program because we address all the children, not only we don't want to stigmatize the children at risk. That's why we address all the children. That's why it's a primary prevention program.
Yeah, but I think that a teacher will choose this program when he or she sees that there is a problem in class.
No, the lessons are fixed. They are not integrated in the schedule of the pupils according to the problems of an actual problem. These lessons are just like mathematics or reading lessons. Every Friday, 9 o'clock to 10 o'clock, there is a Faustlos lesson. No? So and it's also very relevant to know that we try to integrate the concept for the whole school, not only for one class, because that changes the school climate. So that every teacher can, if there is a problem outside of the class, then he can make the problem-solving behavior which was taught during the Faustlos lesson. So the second is, which is very fine in your example. There are many of those workshops which are very well established and because there is very good consciousness of the parents and the teachers to have these workshops now. The problem with single workshops is always that it's not a continuous program. And because if you live in a family, heavy burdened family, for years, you also need another space of experience which also lasts years. So just a single workshop is for those children nothing. And the empirical evidence shows that you need years to find some effects. And you only have, if you are a researcher, you only get effect sizes of 0.15 to 0.20. So you get very low effect sizes, but with healthy children, of course. So you really have to work very hard to change something in the children, and that takes time. Thank you so much for these thoughts.
We have a maximum of 8 minutes for discussion.
Yes, thank you very much for your very stimulating and very rich presentation. I have 2 questions which are big ones, so I'll try to put them very quickly.
Yeah,
the first one.
Only 8 minutes.
No, 8 minutes for all of us, not just me and you. First of all, you mentioned at one point at the beginning that it was an international study. My interest is about the spread of the diversity and the spread of your samples. How sort of universal are your conclusions in terms of other cultures, other countries, other social strata than Germany, than the US? That's my first question. My second question addresses an issue that was raised by Andreas Hamburger this morning and others, is how many people that have adverse childhood factors, to use your terms, do not experience a transition, that is, are not second generation sort of violent people.
Okay. There are around 5 or 6 longitudinal studies. 5 of them are conducted in the industrialized countries, New Zealand, Australia, the US, England. The 6th one was done in Kauai. And Mr. Homburger told you about this study, which is now over 40 years. So it's a length of 40 years, time span. And in this study, as he told you this morning, Mrs. Werner also, Emmy Werner also looked for the compensatory factors. And she found, it's a sample of 695, I think, children, which were identified in the whole island. So it's a total sample in this island, Kauai. And 230 of them were identified as risk children with adverse childhood experiences. And then she found that of these 230, 1/3 did not show problematic behavior during adolescence. And she followed up these children, and she found that another third, after 40 years, when the children reached the age of 40, did not show problematic behavior. So only 1/3 of these children stayed in a problematic condition. This 1/3 is a very, in resilient research, 1/3 of the cases usually don't show problematic or violent behavior or drug behavior or whatever, because there seem to be resilient factors, compensatory factors. The best compensatory factor you can have is if you marry a good spouse, if you have a good psychotherapist. So these are really persons with functional relationship which can break the cycle of violence.
Okay. You had a question?
I had a question.
Yes. Oh, but yeah, you're right. Thank you.
Professor Sierpka, you said family at risk don't show up, and you concentrate on children. Now, adults at risk of violence also don't show up.
Yeah.
Do you have a recipe to concentrate on these adults?
It would be very good to have a recipe. I don't have one. I mean, we all struggle very hard to get access to those adolescents. I mean, you have to enter their world, of course. Sometimes making contact is the hardest work of all the work. Because these people don't trust you anymore because they learned not to trust to people. And making contact is really that's a good question.
Okay, doesn't have to be an answer for every question. That's not possible. We have a short question from the person from the Red Cross, and then one there, and I think I will have to close them.
Thanks. I'm making action research on prevention, and I'm focusing on children at risk in war-affected countries. So I think that these kind of projects are really welcome. What I have observed, nevertheless, in the past years is that most intervention in prevention are aimed at changing individual behavior, whether children behavior, whether parents' behavior, or becoming good parents. There is much less investment which is done on changing the structural conditions around parents, which make them poor, which create inequalities. So, would you, it's quite striking, I think, probably those interventions could really help make some results more sustainable. So, do you have any thought about that? How could we ensure that more intervention are done on a structural level? We know that politicians have a short-term view, and it's difficult to convince them about that. But do you have any clue about how we could have more of such interventions?
I mean, you are absolutely right. It's not sufficient just to approach one level. you should always approach a couple of levels. For example, what we did is that we have these intervention programs for the families on the one hand side, and we also try to restructure the professional network in the counties so that it's possible to make contacts with these families so that none of the families slips through the cracks. So that's why the most work we did was on the restructuring of the professional field, so that the people are going to cooperate to each other and with each other. It's really a huge task to bring medical staff members together with with people from the social welfare system. The gynecologists don't talk to the midwives because from their professions they are competing all the time. The pediatrician with the gynecologist and the counselors with the psychotherapist. And you have so many problems. So you have to establish the network. That's very, very necessary. And that's in Germany it's the case, and I can believe it's also in all the other countries the case, to establish the structure. And also in addition, you need some programs, of course, to help the families. And that's also, again, on different levels. Poverty, child care, and then the social emotional interventions. Yeah? You have a bundle of measures. And the art is to combine them appropriately, the measures. Because we have many measures, but they are just staying separately.
Okay. A short question, a short answer.
Yeah, I try to keep it short. I've got a question regarding to the general part where you showed us those general education concepts which should be applied from the parents. And there I must provocatively say that you just scientifically explain things that have been known for quite a while, because the importance of fixed structures, of discipline on one hand, and of warmth and assurance on the other hand, have been known quite for a long time before there even has been this scientific approach. And now there's my question: how come that we nowadays have this large quantity of advice literature? How come that mothers and fathers seem to have lost their natural instinct for education? How come that? Where comes this loss of orientation? Couldn't it be that the huge mass of different pedagogical concepts itself have caused this loss of orientation? That our tendency to overstructure the family and to overstructure and to over-organize the family instead of trusting to our natural instincts have caused that, and that we should therefore return to strategies that have proven, that have shown that they are useful. And now I must raise the question to the audience, and I'm addressing especially the older people.
That's neither a short nor an easy question.
I'm addressing the older participants. Have you made such bad experiences with your parents that those old concepts don't have any value anymore? Yeah, it wasn't a short question, I'm sorry.
I think that's a misunderstanding, just a misunderstanding, because we try that our parents trust their own competencies, and they are there. But some of the parents just are not very confident in these competencies. And that's the question. How does it come that our parents in our times now are not very confident in their own competencies? And I mean, people write these parent guidebooks because they make profit. It's just, you can make a lot of profit with those books. And these books are not very well written. Most of them are not very well written and are some of them are even wrong, no, for the parents. So we try to make the parents more confident. In former times, the grandparents told the parents, like my parents did, of course. They just told us, how you handle the babies, that's very nice. You do it according to all the standards. It's very good how you do it. And you need those assertions by authorities. You need it. But because grandparents and parents are not so frequent together in our times, and there is family erosion, and it's getting more and more difficult because women have of course, and it's good that they want to have that as their professional career and the children. So there is so much tension in the families, and we have somehow to deal with all the burdens of the families. The families are overburdened nowadays, and we have to support them. That's my recipe.
So thank you very much, Sarah.